Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 146 for Monday, June 21st, 2021. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining me, as always, is my friend Jonny, also known as Pixel Riffs on the interwebs. Hello, sir.
Hello, and we've had a delightful chat already with our guest for today, who we teased at the end of the last episode, and we're very excited that Brandon Pearce is joining us, better known to the community perhaps as Kingbdogz. Brandon is our first Mojang team member to appear on the show, is a Minecraft gameplay developer, but before that was known as the creator of the Ether mod and the Orbis mod. So if anybody has ever been that small child who threw a bucket of water into a portal made of glowstone and was wondering why that didn't work in vanilla Minecraft, Brandon is to blame, and you can blame him on Twitter at Kingbdogz. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I am so excited to be talking with you two.
Yeah, it's fantastic to have you here. It's, like I said, our first time talking to somebody from Mojang. We're going to be picking your brain about the stuff that you've been working on for the Caves and Cliffs update, and probably a little bit of the Nether update as well. But honestly, yeah, having followed a bunch of you guys on Twitter for a while, it's just fantastic that you're willing to spend a bit of time talking to us and interacting with the community as often as you do. So big thank you for that.
No problem. I love it. I love talking to the community. It's one of my favorite things to do as part of this job.
So every week we tend to do our quick login where we talk about what's new in our Minecraft life. I guess we should probably start with our guests, but I want to ask, do you spend a lot of time playing Minecraft in your time off, or have you been diving into the Caves and Cliffs update the way everybody else has and seeing what your teammates and everyone has been working on, or what else have you been playing during your vacation?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think I overall play Minecraft more now than I did before I joined Mojang, just because I have to, like, as useful as it is to get feedback from the community, I think it's also super valuable to just see how it feels to me as a player. In my off time, I don't tend to play, like, for example, I'm on vacation right now. I haven't played too much Minecraft. I did play a little bit with just a few co-workers. We like set up a realm and played like the first part of Caves and Cliffs, and that was interesting just to see how it feels. But it's hard to work on a game all the time and then also play it all the time. So I try to avoid it if I can and do other things so my life isn't just entirely Minecraft.
Yeah. I expect a lot of people have that perception, like maybe some younger people who are interested in game development, the idea that if you get to go and work on Minecraft, that just means you get to go and play Minecraft every day. And I suppose from what you said, to a certain extent, that is true, but there must definitely be times where you shut it off and you're like, no more Minecraft for at least a week, and so you can recharge those batteries.
And because of like the way you're playing it, it's arguable if you could even call it playing Minecraft. It's more like, I don't know, it's like I'm acting like a player might act, rather than actually getting immersed and playing it just for the joy of it. Because I'm so interested in how the different features and systems that we've developed are working within the game. So I don't know if it's necessarily as enjoyable as it might be, you know, pre-Mojang, when I'm just like playing it as a player, not as a developer.
As somebody who has now seen the code, you're like, I understand how all of this works and why it works the way it does.
Absolutely.
So the mystery is gone a little bit. Well, yeah, I mean, good to hear that you've been having some time off at least, and you know, you've all been working very hard on getting Caves and Cliffs Part 1 out, and we know there is more to come, but it's good to know that you can at least take a bit of a break for now.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually, I mean, apart from playing a little bit of Minecraft, I've been just scratching up on my skills with the Unity engine and just trying to make some like little games by myself just to learn some C# and understand how that engine works. Because I've done Unity development before. I actually made a like free game with my brother at some point because he's a game developer as well. But I haven't done anything from the ground up by myself. So it's just been exciting to do something else creatively.
It's cool to hear it runs in the family, though. How about you, Joel? What have you been up to this week?
I had a very busy weekend outside of Minecraft. I did get in there, but I didn't do a whole lot. I logged in and went looking for a geode on the Citadel. looking to expand the Caves and Cliffs block palette. Didn't find one, but I did find an awful lot of dripstone, which is good because I didn't have that much to begin with, which prompted me to try to make a dripstone roof with the new dripstone block texture. That roof kicked my butt. It is not done. I'm not entirely happy with it. The texture ended up being okay. I was working with, I think it was gray terracotta and the dripstone, and then I think it was stripped dark oak. No, yeah, stripped dark oak that I put on the ends to try and give it some sort of frame. Normally, I've just been doing stairs for roofs, so doing a full block roof was something new to me. I feel like the texture was working okay. It was more the roof geometry that I was having trouble with, specifically the top part, which actually had nothing to do with dripstone. But it was one of those stream sessions where you walked away feeling this is unfinished. It's going to require either some time away from stream where I can just focus and build, or just another stream to try and sort it all out. But it's Minecraft, so you can just, take it down and put it back up again however you want. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I tried, which I don't know why I haven't done this before, but I have Xbox Game Pass, and I was wanting to kind of relax and play Minecraft, but it was just too hot in my studio. So I loaded up a New World on the Bedrock Edition on the Xbox. I don't know how people play Minecraft with Xbox controllers, because my game session went something like this: no, not there; no, not there; no, no, not there; no, I didn't place it there. Anyway, that aside, I had probably the neatest spawn and the neatest seed that I have ever experienced in Minecraft. I spawned in at the bottom of a ravine, looking at an open geode, and then I turned to my right and saw an abandoned mineshaft. So I was just like, well, wow. I'm home.
Yeah.
The only thing I had to worry about later on, after making sure that the mineshaft was blocked off, I did find some cave spiders scurrying around. I was like, nope, I can't even aim right now. I don't need you causing me grief. But I had to go topside. Eventually I had to build enough ladders to get out of the ravine because I needed food. It was the only thing that I couldn't find. I didn't get any glowberries from the mineshaft chests. But it was an interesting experience, to say the least. I was like, this is a really cool seed, and I want to explore this, because you just get sucked into that what's around this corner thing in Minecraft. But the fact that I was having so much trouble navigating was just, it was almost amusing, but also frustrating at the same time.
Brandon, is most of your Minecraft played on PC, or do you dabble on other platforms from time to time?
Absolutely, mostly PC.
Yeah.
I share your experience with Xbox controller, but even worse than that for me personally, not for everyone, was playing on Android. That was rough. Just for me, touch controls in general for gaming is really something that I just can't. Maybe it's because I didn't grow up with it. I grew up with PCs my entire life, and now there are a lot of kids growing up with touchscreens, and that's the way they play a lot of their games now. But for me, it's like I had the same experience. I'm like, I did not mean to place that there. I didn't mean to swing my sword. It's really, really challenging.
Yeah, I have that sense as well. And as an alumnus of the Xbox 360 edition, which I played for about 6 months before I moved to PC, I couldn't go back, I think. I think camera control alone is the thing that I would have the hardest time readjusting to, because of PCs just being, so easy with mouse sensitivity and so forth. You can turn on a dime, and with the Xbox with analog sticks, maybe you could up the sensitivity a little bit, but everything just feels so measured as you turn, like you're always turning at exactly the same speed. And yeah, I don't think I could react to stuff quickly enough to really play the survival game very well. Maybe a little bit of creative mode here and there, but like you, I think it would just be a little bit frustrating trying to break and place everything.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to this week, Jonny?
I'm still gathering copper, building blast furnaces, and trading with my server mates on the Empire's SMP. I've been doing a bit more building there, working with sandstone and copper together, which is a palette that I really love now. I've discovered that dripstone makes for some really nice wind-carved rock formations in the deserts. I can see it used in kind of canyon builds and that kind of thing, and so I'm wondering if my server mates who settled in mesa biomes are going to be using some of those. yeah, other terraforming projects are just kind of popping into my head now that I've had a chance to gather more dripstone and get hold of it. I'm not farming it yet because I think probably based on your warnings, Joel, about it being incredibly slow, I think I'm probably going to try exploring for more of it and then see if I can get some from my server mates who are farming it already. But yeah, I'm really happy with how this build is coming together so far. Also using some of the most expensive blocks that I've ever built with. I put a diamond block and some beehives at one end of it as I was designing it in creative and thought, yeah, I'll go with that. And I'm talking the bee nests that you get from trees out in the wild, not like the player-made beehive. So yeah, those are kind of difficult to build with, it turns out. But really enjoying the combination of the two of them. And in my hardcore world, I'm working on auto-sorted storage, which is great until it means going and finding the wood types I don't have yet. So right now I'm in the process of tracking down a jungle and a savanna biome, which are the last two overworld wood types I need to complete my storage filters and actually be able to farm every single type of wood. I still need to track down a warped forest in the nether, but that might be another job for another episode.
Looking at the screenshot that you shared with the desert build, I love the dripstone, the stalagmites. They read almost as like cacti or bushes, like a different kind of plant as opposed to a stone stalagmite.
Yeah, I've been looking at ways to incorporate the builds into the surroundings without just putting bushes everywhere, which I've done liberally in this picture. But I find that if it's just kind of... If it becomes an automatic reflex to like, oh, I'll just kind of hide the join between the building and the ground with a few leaves here and there, it just starts to become so repetitive that I start to lose interest in it creatively. And so I started messing around with other blocks and, piling sand up against the side of things with slabs and stairs. And then I thought, we'll give dripstone a try. And yeah, I was just really happy with the results. So yeah, whether it comes across as like more of a foliage kind of vibe because of the shape of pointed dripstone, or if it's just the rock formations kind of forming around it a certain way, or some kind of geological activity has caused it, the lore for it is going to vary. But I think in terms of the color palette, it's quite complementary and adds something very different to what all of the leaves are doing.
I'm surprised how well the copper goes with the sandstone, actually.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've wanted to work with sandstone and a greenish color palette for a while, and I always think the two the pairing of sandstone and prismarine worked super well. So copper was just kind of a logical extension of that, and the gradient you can make with copper is just so satisfying to me. I've also started pairing fences with it. So we've got acacia, junglewood, and warped fences going in to kind of match up with some of the tones of copper. Still missing one that really matches well with the exposed copper, but it's going pretty well so far, I think.
I've been experimenting with the regular copper blocks, so the non-oxidized, and stripped acacia logs for what look like copper stills in the basement of my keep. And I thought I was going to be able to do the whole thing with copper, but it actually turns out that the copper blocks, because of their rivets, they almost look better as like a bottom cap and a top cap, and then you have the vertical kind of striations in the acacia logs that make it look like a burnished metal or something like that in between. But it's really interesting how you look at acacia and most of the time in Minecraft and you think wood, but when you put it next to copper, it tends to look like brushed metal instead. It's interesting kind of play on visuals.
You can switch up the context of stuff like that so easily, and yeah, the copper is just kind of fascinating. Getting hold of a large amount of it has been a challenge, but I'm going caving basically every other day just to see if I can find more of it. And we have a bit more news on how we can potentially be farming copper with this week's news. So let's roll into the news, because after that we have a ton of questions to get to from ourselves and our listeners. Kind of pick Brandon's brain about all of the stuff going on in Minecraft development.
Yep, absolutely.
This week in Minecraft development, Minecraft 1.17.1 pre-release 1 was put out. I believe that was on Friday. Blue axolotls can now only be obtained through breeding. Non-screaming goats now have a rare chance to produce a screaming goat when bred. Status effects on goats now also apply when the goat is jumping or ramming. The drop rate for copper ingots has been raised from drowned to 11% plus 2% per level of looting. Powder snow now fills cauldron 2 times faster than it did before. It's still pretty slow though. Zombies, zombie villagers, husks, and drowned will no longer pick up glow ink sacs. So not a lot of changes, just a few tweaks here and there. A number of bug fixes, of course, and those are all going to be listed on the Minecraft.net article that we usually have linked in our show notes.
I love two things about this. Well, I love all of it, really, but for a start, the patch notes having a sentence like, non-screaming goats now have a chance to produce a screaming goat. Just like, it is born and it can only scream. It's just such a terrifying sentence out of context. But
only in Minecraft.
Right. But obviously the main thing I'm interested in is the drowned dropping more copper. This is actually bringing it up in line with the rates that you get on Bedrock Edition, and I know Bedrock Edition drowned spawning works differently. They are in some occasions the bane of players' existence on Bedrock Edition, but it has a different approach to spawning the drowned, but potentially a lot more copper can come out of drowned farms, which I think is something players are keen for, because caving, while it's very productive for copper, is not always going to be everyone's speed, and the need to have a renewable source of rare materials like that makes sense when the copper in the world is technically finite. No huge veins for us quite yet, but a lot of research has been gone into with the technical community for how to farm copper more efficiently, and just the other day Nembon released a video on a copper farm which actually gets really good rates for copper using the reinforcement mechanics of zombies on hard difficulty. So if you punch a zombie, if you deal damage to it but you don't kill it, it spawns more zombies sort of in defense, so you get that kind of zombie horde created. And just rigging up a fairly large area around a zombie spawner to then allow for those reinforcements to spawn when snow golems throw snowballs at zombies, you end up with a system that can effectively avoid the mob cap and just bring tons of zombies into one place, drown them, and then the player kills them for looting drops and everything else that zombies from spawners can provide, which is not tridents and nautilus shells, unfortunately, but is a whole lot of copper in 1.17 and potentially even more in 1.17.1.
That's really cool. I didn't think of that particular method of like using zombies.
The community has been doing a lot of kind of number crunching when it comes to, a naturally spawned drowned going to be better? Can we, take them out of the mob cap by putting them through nether portals, various different approaches? And honestly, I'm probably going to still build a river biome in the sky drowned farm because I need nautilus shells to make lots of conduits for the stuff I'm building, because again, I've chosen to make myself make the stuff I'm building ridiculously difficult. But I think it's neat that there are still mechanics out here that we can play with and that players haven't necessarily worried about because they haven't needed this amount of drops from a zombie type of mob before. It's effectively like using zombies as an iron farm when an iron farm would have done. But yeah, it's a really cool mechanic. And outside of that, I'm sure the changes in 1.17 are still going to make it at least a little bit more viable for the average drowned farm to produce a bit more copper.
Mm-hmm.
I had to look this up, but previously the Java Edition drop rate was 5% and an increase of 1% per looting level. So it's more than doubled.
Yeah, it was a maximum of 8%, and now it's a maximum of, I think, about 17. So potentially, yeah, a lot better. One other thing I wanted to draw people's attention to, because this was hilarious, the status effects on goats now applying when the goat is jumping or ramming. Olraf put out a video on Twitter that perfectly demonstrates what this is, with a goat attacking a creeper on a mountaintop, and if you give it a speed potion, the creeper disappears over the horizon. It just gets rammed off this mountain, and it travels probably, it's knockback 10 levels of distance. It's absurd. And so I can see people having a lot of fun with goats, and either traps for other players, or just playing around with mechanics like this. Giving them jump boost makes them jump about 3 times as high, and they can already jump pretty high. So I'd recommend, we're going to link that video in the show notes if anybody hasn't seen this yet. Go and check out Olraf's video on goat ramming, because it is next level stuff.
When it comes to those kinds of videos, Brandon, is that something that an individual developer would just take it upon themselves to go and do, or is that something that is part of like a greater social media plan? It just seems like it's such a fun thing. If it was part of your just daily routine or something that you had on the list to do, I would imagine it would be just champing at the bit to get that done during the days. I can't wait to do this goofy video.
It's super spontaneous. We don't have we don't have rules around it. I think there are some guidelines, like unofficial guidelines within the team of like, if we're going to show something on Twitter that maybe hasn't been announced yet or hasn't been officially confirmed within the community, we do our best to at least ask within the team first and say like, hey, do you think this is okay to post out on Twitter? That way that, if there is any reason why we wouldn't want to, then we can catch it beforehand and not do it. But otherwise, no, I mean, there's no like official like rules around it. We just kind of post whatever we're working on. And I think that's been really successful in being able to cultivate a community and a community interaction with the developers, so that we actually are talking to everyone and it feels a bit more organic rather than just being sort of like a corporation,
Yeah, I would agree. It's really great having stuff, A, straight from the developers, and B, the developers just sharing cool stuff they've found as though, a player has found it in that sense. Like, it's better than all of the kind of, here is something fun you should consume being handed down from on high. It feels a lot more personal that way.
Yeah, and we also try to only post stuff that we personally worked on. Like, let's say if Oraf worked on something, it wouldn't be cool for me to just randomly post videos of goats when he's the one that actually worked on it. So, we try our best to let the people who worked on it actually shine and have their moments to actually present it to the community.
No, nobody gets to post cool things about lightning rods, otherwise you're stealing their thunder.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to do it. Yeah, the other cool thing from this changelog is zombies and anything else that can pick up mob drops not being able to pick up glow ink sacks. I will honestly say that zombies are probably my second best source of glow ink after just finding it randomly in caves after glow squid have died. So I haven't gotten around to figuring out the mechanics of farming glow squid yet, but I'm glad to hear we're not going to end up with more persistent zombies as a result, because the amount I find glow ink in caves and think, well, a zombie could have picked that up, it's good to know that stuff like that is being amended at least.
Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that like with the kind of water sources that we have underground in part 1 and how derpy squids are in general, the glow squids just die, and it's kind of one of those things that because squids are already, they're just like that, the behavior is quite bad, to be honest. It would be nice to fix eventually, I think, but as of right now, with the way part 1 is, it'll be much better in part 2 when you have the aquifers around and there's large spaces of water and they're not going to get trapped so often or just like spawn in a water stream and die from suffocating.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that you can tell had to be some sort of compromise because you were so keen on sharing glow squids with everybody, and honestly, like, being able to get hold of glow ink and use it now has been fantastic with all of the recent changes that were made to it. But yeah, I can see how it's one of those features that really needs to be seen in the context of part 2 to get the full effect of it. And in in a few months' time, hopefully when part 2 arrives, nobody's going to really remember, oh, that one time glow squid ended up dying in caves so much, because they're going to be so distracted by all of the cool stuff that's going to be underground from that point that I don't think it will quite live in infamy in the same way that the flying squid will, but we'll see.
Not quite.
So what do you think we move on to chunk mail, Jonny?
Absolutely, let's do it. Folks, if you'd like to email the show, the email address to reach out to us is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com, and we've had a whole bunch of email this week, as you might expect, having such a wonderful guest on the show. We've had lots of questions, and some very, very good quality questions as well, so thank you so much for those. This first one comes in from Shepard, who is a landscape artist member of our Discord, and the subject is developing the most popular game. All right, so prepare for this one. Hi, Kingbdogz, Jonny, and Joel. First of all, Kingbdogz, congratulations on the successful release of a great new update. It made me excited to go out into my world and find all the new blocks and mobs, in particular all the deepslate ores. I was wondering, how does it feel to have your professional work that you're passionate about, scrutinized by such a large and opinionated community? And how does this influence the development process? In a Twitter thread a while back, you talked about how it would be great to be able to add more experimental things to snapshots, even if they might not make it into the game. Do you think that this would have helped with the development of some of the features planned for the Caves and Cliffs update? Is it possible to experiment with ideas like that where Minecraft Live already sets such high expectations for what the next update will contain? Maybe something similar to the combat snapshots would be a viable option for experiments, a separate development track with no large official announcements. The amount of feedback would likely be lower, but so would the expectations. Looking forward to hearing from you. Shepard signs off very, very quietly, I presume because you're hunting wabbits. So a couple of questions to go into here, so let's tackle them one by one. First of all, Minecraft being such a huge game and having this enormous community built in, a community that obviously you've been part of for a very long time. But how does it feel to then have people pick apart your work after the fact?
Yeah, it's always tricky to answer this question because on one hand, it's kind of like almost an honor that you're making a game or working on a game that people care about so much and it's cared about so widely by so many people. Like that's huge, and that's really... It's kind of something that I wouldn't have ever expected. I would be in that situation in my life. And it's great, but also it can be challenging because you need to find a way to filter out the criticism and the feedback. And even within feedback that can be really nasty, sometimes it's good to even look into those pieces of feedback and see what is the underlying cause for them to be so upset. Sometimes you get people that, don't give very constructive feedback, or they give feedback that maybe it's constructive, but it's just kind of random. Like, it doesn't really make sense why they're giving that piece of feedback. But then you realize that, oh, maybe they're this sort of player archetype and the game just doesn't fit for them in this particular way. Maybe we need to expand that area of the game more. I don't know. It's really, really tricky for me.
I've found that probably one of the most outspoken members of the team is Jasper Burstra, who's the art lead. Mm-hmm. He is often the one to not necessarily push back on criticism, but kind of deconstruct the reasons behind a lot of the feedback that he gets. And I've heard him talk about, reading between the lines. That's something that, I can support this a bit with my experience as a YouTube content creator. My work is very public and with pretty much constant feedback through video comments. Some of it inevitably sort of ends up negative. And you learn to recognize patterns in that and sort of read between the lines. And from that, you can start to steer things in a direction that the community wants while still satisfying yourself creatively. It's a very difficult line to walk, but when people give Jasper feedback on textures and, a lot of it is just them memeing about how the raw ore blocks look like beans, but then that can at least be to a certain extent feedback of like either people really like the fact that it looks like beans and that's a fun joke, but also it still looks really good and that will help it stick in the mind, or maybe I should take this in a slightly different direction so that they don't all look a certain way. And I think that the team overall does a phenomenal job of balancing this, because otherwise I expect a flood of like negativity or what might seem like people nitpicking work that you're very proud of has got to get to you after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, like in the example of the textures with Japper, it's, you see some feedback on like a particular texture that is shared, and the opinions vary so widely. Like some people will say like it's the best version of the texture so far, and then other people say it's the worst version of the texture so far.
Yeah.
And so I think when the opinions differ so much, I can't speak for Japper, but what I personally do is try to focus in on what I was trying to do with that feature or that particular piece of work, and try to hone in a little bit more on my creative vision and make the best thing that I can make. And then that way, even if maybe everyone's super divided, at the very least I've stuck to the vision that I started with from the beginning, and hopefully it will be a better feature as a result of that at the end.
And that kind of rolls into the second part of Shepard's question about being able to make more experimental things which might not end up in the game. And I feel like they've also outlined in this email that there is a lot of community expectation that anything we see in a Minecraft snapshot is then going to be a feature for the future, and anything that, you know, people even so much as tease on Twitter, everyone just gets really excited as though it's going to be added as a feature. So you've got to tread quite carefully around a community like this. But maybe you can expand on that idea. Like, how do you think that could work into the future of Minecraft development? Do you think there is room for an arena in which Minecraft features are developed and tried out but ultimately not added?
Yeah, I mean, first I'll start with like the reason why I think this concept could be interesting is even with features that have been announced, let's say like the Warden or archaeology, we of course delayed them, especially archaeology. That's not going to come out until much later, and the Warden is not coming out in part 1. So it would have been interesting if, you know, we could have snapshotted those earlier, even though we knew that they weren't going to be in part 1. And then we could have got feedback earlier and been able to iterate on it, even if it's not going to make it at the time that players expect. And I think that could be, you know, it could be overall very positive. But then again, as I mentioned in those Twitter threads, it's really challenging because players have expectations as soon as they can hold something in their hands, so to speak. As soon as they see it in front of them on their game, on their screen, they expect it to come. And if it doesn't, then, well, the pitchforks come out. So what is the solution? I'm not really sure, but I think it's kind of like, it comes in 2 parts. One is cultivating a particular culture, I guess, within the community of like, features aren't set in stone, and change should be expected. Even cutting should be expected. I think that's one part, and doing that, I'm not sure how. Part 2 would be actually doing it in some fashion, whether it's, like you said, a separate combat snapshot or something like it. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing to think of, because I think Minecraft as a game can go in so many different directions. And I don't know that, you know, we could try something crazy, but we don't necessarily want to just keep it there as if it's 100% going to get in, because it might not be the direction that we want the game to go in. But at the same time, we'd like players to be able to see and give feedback regardless.
It's the kind of thing that you see a lot of people doing in the modding community already, and you'll know this from experience, but I think the sheer amount of directions Minecraft can go is reflected in how diverse the amount of mods that get added in terms of theme, in terms of content, in terms of like expansion of the game, or zeroing in on a specific feature. And my line of thinking with this is I wonder what your thoughts are on mods that basically take features that have been announced, like the Warden, like the Skulk family of blocks, and try and emulate them for a mod based on what's already been presented to us through shows like Minecraft Live. Are you excited to see people trying to mock up the Warden before you're done with it? Or does that feel a little bit like, you know, people don't have the full vision of it yet? And so does it feel like a kind of a pale imitation of what you're working on?
I think I would be... I don't know. First of all, I think it's super awesome. I think anyone who like gets super inspired by something in Minecraft and tries to create content, whether it's mods or textures or whatever, I think it's amazing. Of course, in saying that, it is important that people who play those mods recognize that, yeah, as you said, they don't have the full vision. Maybe the mechanics, like in very specific areas, aren't exactly the same. But that it's harmless. It's still really cool to me. I don't really have any problem with it whatsoever. But to your point before, I think modding in general kind of is like what I'm talking about, where you just kind of throw out an idea and there's no stakes to it. Like, people can choose to download the mod, or they can choose not to download the mod, or they can download it and then remove it later. In that sense, people can just throw out ideas and we can find kind of the gems from all of those thousands upon thousands of ideas. I think it would be cool to have something like that within vanilla itself, in regards to trying many random ideas. Like, just as a crazy idea, just off the top of my head, what if randomly we snapshotted trying, you couldn't sleep anymore, you can't change, you can't pass to the next day? Obviously it's a terrible idea, but that's kind of the extent of like how big I think we should be able to go with just trying random things and seeing how the community reacts. Maybe they'll see it and they'll go, "This is terrible. Why would you ever think of doing that?" But that's still good feedback. That means we know that 100% we should never do that in the real game.
With the separation of Caves and Cliffs Parts 1 and Part 2, the team has started publishing a data pack that adds in some of the features which are already being worked on for Part 2 to include, different world height and bigger caves and everything like that. Do you think data packs like that with features which are closed off to the standard base game but could be opened up with a data pack might potentially be a way into that? Or does that feel like, just the same thing as snapshots, basically?
Yeah, I guess it just depends on where the technology is. I mean, the reason why data packs can do that is because a lot of the world generation is exposed to data packs. But something like creating a new block, that's at the moment just not something you can do with data packs. So if we can do it, I don't see why it couldn't be an option. Whether we'd want to do it, I think that would be a full team decision. So I'm not sure on that.
It's really fascinating getting all of your thoughts on this. And thank you so much again, Shepard, for the email. Joel, how about you read our next one?
Sure. Next email comes in from Rabelais, and it is about aging blocks. Hello, Jonny, Joel, and Kingbdogz. With the introduction of weathering copper in 1.17, is it at all likely that we'll see an aging mechanic added to other blocks? I'm especially interested in seeing weathered wood and stone, but I'm not sure if that adds too much complexity for the game to keep track of. Is there a tactical reason not to have this as a normal block variable? Your primed and painted friend, Rabelais.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think with the aging mechanic, one of the good things is that we have it in the game now. So if we wanted to, add a new block which utilize that, we could. From a design perspective, whether or not we'd want to, it's challenging because one of the principles that we have within the team is making sure that every new feature or every block that we add has a unique mechanic that sets it apart. To me, that doesn't necessarily mean that there will never be any more aging mechanics in the game. But at the same time, I think we're very careful about introducing blocks that are similar. So I know this is usually the answer of like a maybe or a not yes, not no, but it kind of is like that within the team because we always have exceptions to our own rules. That happens. But then we also do have our rules that we try to stick by. I think it could be really interesting.
As a player, I've been really enjoying the age mechanics of Copper so far. I think because it's been kind of an intriguing puzzle to work out how it interacts with blocks nearby, how you can spread out Copper blocks to age them faster, or if you want to let them age naturally or pre-age them to achieve a specific effect. It kind of it's a very in-depth mechanic, and so I think naturally players think, well, what if this applied to everything else in the game? And obviously that kind of goes a little wild in terms of scope and also maybe takes some of the special nature of Copper away a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it's good to know that the team is at least going to give some consideration to mechanics like that being open in future. And maybe if this is a mechanic of another block that also has some other unique aspect about it, it can be viable for the future. So that it's not just aping Copper, but with a different material.
Yeah, it's definitely, in the end, it's about value. If we start introducing more blocks that have the same mechanic, there is a question of would players want to mine Copper as much? If it's difficult because Copper is a decorative block right now for the most part. And as a result of that, it being decorative, even if there was another aging block with it being decorative, maybe they look very different. So they're both valuable in their own rights. But it's still a question that I would ask if considering that sort of feature.
The thing that Rabelais mentioned just kind of tuned me into this, in that the way that you can strip a log with an axe and the way that you can wax or strip oxidation from copper with an axe, it almost feels like wood has an age control in the game. It doesn't do it naturally in the world under a time thing like Copper does, but it allows the player to say this is either going to look natural or it's going to look, in some cases, aged, or in some cases, new or refined. So it has kind of like a time I guess, stamp that you can put on it by saying this log has just been here as a log, or it's been here long enough that part of the bark has fallen off, as a, sometimes happens with a rotting tree. And I didn't realize the similarities until just now. A follow-up question that we got from Genius General 06 with regards to adding things like this into the game that are complicated. What are the biggest obstacles and challenges you encounter when adding features into Minecraft?
It entirely depends on the feature. Sometimes it's really kind of smooth sailing. It's, a little simpler. Like for me, I would say something like soul speed enchantment was pretty easy for me when I worked on it, because we already have the enchantment system in there. Of course, it's unique, it's new, it interacts with soul soil and soul sand in a unique way, but it's relatively simple compared to something like the Strider, which the Strider has a whole new way of moving in the world. We never had a mob beforehand that could actually physically stand on lava. So that got a lot more technical, and we had to consider that with the design as well. And then something like the Warden, which is even more complex, it has a whole new, system of using its tendrils to sense movement and kind of sounds in the environment. So because of that, even more technical. So I'd say when it comes to designing, one of the things that is really challenging is balancing between, I want to do something new with this feature to kind of, bring Minecraft closer to something, kind of revolutionize it in each update. But at the same time, not going overboard in that the tech is so advanced and so crazy new that we just can't get it done. And finding that balance can be really, really tricky. And it's always easier to design or develop new features that utilize existing systems and existing tech within the game.
Do you think that moving ahead to Java 16 is going to help in that regard with the technical challenges moving forward?
In terms of rendering, from what I'm aware, I'm not someone who is specialized in rendering, but talking to people like Felix, who is also on Twitter, he definitely has kind of said to me, like, there's definitely a lot more we can do now. It kind of opens up the gates to the possibilities of rendering within the game. It's going to be a slow process, of course, but we now have more tools at our disposal.
Let's move on to our third email. This one comes in from Toogie Fox, and the subject is a time management question. Hiya, Mr. Riffs, Duggan, and Dogs. With the multiple projects that Pixelriffs has going on currently, Joel's busy podcasting and streaming schedule, and the release of Caves and Cliffs Update Part 1 for Kingbdogz, I've been thinking a lot about time management. How do each of you manage projects and content online, as well as balancing things like sleeping, eating, and engaging in family time? How do you keep it from getting on top of you? How do you not get burned out and run out of inspiration? And how much of your schedule has changed with lockdown situations around the globe, changing a lot of normal day-to-day activity? Thanks for the podcast. It has been a blocky staple of my online media consumption since about episode 50. Love what you do. And remember, even if you get weary and sick of trying, that old game Minecraft just keeps chunking along. Yours, Tuggy Fox. I think is that an Old Man River reference? That's it's a deep cut there from Tuggy Fox. But obviously, Brandon, we want to get your opinions on this first. Obviously, talk as much or as little about the pandemic side of things as you want to, but how difficult has it been to adjust all of the busy work of working for the Mojang team with home life and a move for you as well, because you're certainly not a Stockholm native.
No. I mean, the thing is, even before the pandemic and even before Mojang, I would say that time management is something that I've been trying to improve on as I grow and learn as a person. So when the pandemic hit, I think it was like the ultimate boss challenge almost of time management. It's kind of a cop-out answer, but like for me, it's still a learning process. Like it's not like I've got it figured out. And I think maybe that's what it is for a lot of people right now, is that they're trying to learn and get better every day, but we don't have the answers necessarily. It's kind of too strange of a world right now for everyone to just know what to do. For me, what has helped a lot has definitely been this vacation. Being able to just detach myself from work for a bit, and try not to think about it as much, has definitely helped me kind of recontextualize why I work on the game. Because I think when it comes to any sort of creative work, you need to have a very close relationship with the reason for why you do this. And for me, I think if I work too much and I don't manage my time properly, let's say I do like a bunch of extra overtime, I think I start to lose sight of that reason. And it just kind of becomes like, what am I doing this for? You know, like, I think it's much better if you can get back to that, to the reason why you started working at all.
I think to their great credit, Mojang seems to have a very healthy company culture about time management as well, and balancing time. It's clear from the fact that the team has been outspoken about wanting to avoid crunch, and you know, I expect there are a lot of very healthy business practices going on just based on the fact that they've been so open about discussing, no, we're not doing crunch. And so I think that probably helps, is having a kind of corporate culture that encourages you to be a human being a little bit more often, and not spend all of your time working yourself to the bone. For my part, having been self-employed for a while and not just doing Minecraft YouTube stuff, but having, you know, effectively been working freelance from home, doing email support and stuff, giving yourself a routine is obviously a very important part of it. You take breaks, you have a schedule, and like Brandon, you make sure you have days off or vacation, you know. It can be difficult when you're pressured to constantly produce something and you're working in the public eye. If you go away for a while, everybody assumes that you've vanished off the face of the earth because it's the internet and they're used to things just kind of coming to them in a constant stream. And so the old work smarter, not harder adage comes into play. Even just in my own Minecraft stuff, I've been using creative mode to design stuff more, so I'm spending less time just kind of doing trial and error stuff in survival builds, and that cuts down on the amount of time I need to record an episode because I go in with more of a plan, and that leaves me more time to edit the video afterwards if it needs it, or gives me more time to just spend relaxing in the evening after I'm done instead of staying up until past midnight to get a video done. So it's really all about going in with a schedule, difficult though that is when a game as organic as Minecraft is involved and you really have to, you know, roll with what the game gives you at certain times. I think it's very important to understand what your own limits are and what the limits of the game are, and try and find the most healthy combination of the two.
Yeah, I think having a schedule working from home, because I've been doing it for 10 years now, and not just for Minecraft and that kind of content, but for podcasting, for my own artwork and my own design business. And the thing that I've learned it takes a while to get your mind out of it, and that is the 9 to 5 sort of mentality, which is fine if that works for you from home. But one of the advantages, if you are successfully working from home, if you can squeeze in an hour early in the morning or an hour later at night, it means that you can take that hour to have lunch with your mom, or, you know, you are your own boss. You don't have to ask to take a 90-minute lunch break. You can just do it. As long as the deadlines that you have are being met, as long as the things are done on time, then it doesn't really matter. And so I do tend to stick to a Monday to Friday. I've been lucky enough that, you know, I've been able to take weekends off for a while. From, you know, creative work that I do professionally, that break alone helps with a lot of creativity. And I know for myself, you know, with regards to the pandemic, you know, the last 18 months, the thing that I find challenging from a creative standpoint is that while I have all the time in the world to work from home, I'm not experiencing a lot of life outside. Like, I'm not going for, like, you're not seeing random goofy things on the bus. You're not going to a cafe and just observing the public. You know, you're just not around people that much. And I find that a lot of my creative influences, whether it's a joke, something silly I saw, whether it's just observing a street scene as I, you know, meander down a downtown street, which again, I don't do very often now, I'm not getting a lot of inspiration. So as someone that's a professional creator, I find that my inspiration pool is running low. I'm not going to theaters and seeing a lot of, movies. I haven't been spending a lot of time watching Netflix and things at home because I just, after the first 6 months of the pandemic, you're kind of done with that. Like you do it a lot, especially during the winter in Canada. So I find that just knowing your own needs as to what your either work or your hobby requires of you, and then making sure that you get a balance, I think is probably one of the things that helps me with time management. I don't really enjoy working late hours. I don't like working late at night. So I know that I have to make sure that I just don't spend the entire afternoon on the balcony reading a book at lunchtime. I have to make sure I'm back in the studio after a decent break, because otherwise I'll regret it later and I don't want to work until 11:30 p.m.
Brandon, you can speak to that a little because you moved to Stockholm, a city that I presume you hadn't really been to a whole bunch before, and then a pandemic happened and you weren't really able to get out and explore. So are you maybe looking forward to a time when you can, go and see the sights and maybe have some of your co-workers show you their favorite places to hang out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I really empathize with that, Joel, that, not being able to just experience life has kind of creatively been a bit of a blocker for me. And I think that's kind of what I was talking about with, finding the reason for why you do all of this. I think if your life is only work, then what are you doing it for? So for me, I think, just being able to experience life is kind of a way for me to actually understand why I'm so passionate about game design. And to what you said, I think I'm super looking forward to being able to actually just get out again. I did a little bit yesterday and that was really good, but it was all outside and, being responsible. But it's challenging at the moment because the pandemic has just kind of messed everything around.
I'm also looking forward to a time when we can go out somewhere and not have to clarify after the fact that we were being responsible. I feel like everybody has to preface discussions with like, I saw somebody the other day, but it was fine. We were 6 meters away from each other and we weren't shouting. So it's a shame that it has to happen in these circumstances, but hopefully we'll be on to bigger and brighter things. And maybe if you want to come back on the show in future, we can chat about all of the places you've been able to visit around Stockholm.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, though, we're going to move on to some questions that Joel and I prepared ahead of time. We've got a couple more questions that we can weave in from our community because, again, people have been very excited to hear us talk to Bdogz. And once again, for the folks who sent those emails in, thank you for such great discussion topics. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your journey with programming and with Minecraft, because I presume that you found Minecraft the way most other people did by, just picking it up as a fun game to play. So what was your first introduction to Minecraft? Did you find it independently? Were you recommended to it by friends? And how did things go from there?
Yeah, so I got introduced to Minecraft by when I was a teenager. Me and my friends, we used to play LANs a lot. So we'd organize LANs at just each other's houses. And one time we were at one of my friend's house and it was super cramped, like really, really cramped. It was this really tiny room with a gigantic bed. So there was like one desk and no room at all. And we just kind of like put our PCs in any place that we could find. And someone even put their PC and the monitor on the floor and just gamed while like laying down. One of them had started playing Minecraft, and I didn't know what it was or like what it was about. It, to be honest, looked kind of bad to me, like graphics wise. So I was like, how are people enjoying this? And then at the time, unfortunately, there was no multiplayer. This is, quite a long time ago, before multiplayer was even introduced to Minecraft, at least in survival mode. I think there was some stuff in creative beforehand. And we all just played our own single player worlds and just kind of experienced it with not really much preparation of what the game was really like. And suddenly you would just like hear screams from one side of the room as someone has like encountered a zombie or a creeper exploding their base for the first time. And I think for me, what got me hooked was when I first played the game and I built a base like on a coast, but it was kind of above a cave that I couldn't actually see, like it wasn't poking out in the terrain. And there was a dungeon spawner literally right underneath my base. So I kept hearing zombies all the time, like constantly. And I was terrified. I didn't want to ever leave my house. So I just built this giant fortress. And that got me hooked. Absolutely. Like as much as I've learned over the years to enjoy more the creative aspect of the game, and it's really helped me bring out my creative side, I think what really gets me interested in Minecraft was just the visceral immersion into what feels at first like a really childish game, and then suddenly it gets very dark, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool that a sense of community was involved even then, just imagining you and your friends kind of crowding around a monitor and trying to figure out what this game was to begin with, but sharing that experience even though you couldn't play multiplayer at the time. The story of having a friend with just like their monitor and everything wherever reminds me of that one splash screen that says any computer is a laptop if you're brave enough. That's just the vision I have in my head, is everyone just holding their own computer hardware so they can
pretty much,
so they can play. So that must have been, if multiplayer wasn't even introduced, that must have been in the sort of pre-alpha days. Mm-hmm. So you're talking like 2010-ish probably.
I think it may have been InfDev or IntDev. I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
So very early. And at that point, were you already interested in coding stuff of your own, or was Minecraft and developing mods really kind of the catalyst for that passion for you?
It's a long story, but I'll try to like compress it all down as much as I can. When I was very young, I always used to make games make games in quotation marks, by drawing things on pieces of paper and then like cutting them out. So I used to play a lot of RTS games when I was younger. So I would draw units on paper, cut them out, and then align them like an army, and then make games in my head. So that was my first experience trying to make a game. And then finally I got PowerPoint on my computer, and I attempted to make point and click adventures with PowerPoint using hyperlinks. And that was strange, but somehow like I created some things. I tried to create Command and Conquer. That failed terribly, but I tried. And then eventually the big thing for me actually was Warcraft 3. So that game had something called the World Editor, which was basically a map editor, but Blizzard did this amazing thing with the World Editor where they kind of exposed a bunch of things through like regions and triggers, and they had a sort of a GUI like drag and drop programming. And I didn't really know how to program or really even programming logic at the time, but I did a lot of things like making a unit be able to walk in an area and then it would summon something to the side. And so I kind of created like quote unquote mods back then. So I never knew any programming up until Minecraft, and at that point I was still super passionate about modding. I did a bunch of modding beforehand, but I didn't know how to program, and Minecraft could only be modded by learning how to program. And I was intimidated because I really thought that in order to program, you had to be one, very smart, two, very good at math, and three, just understand how games work in general under the hood. And so I just kind of looked up some tutorials of how to decompile Minecraft and add one new item, and I did, and it kind of spiraled from there. I didn't even read any books on how to program. I just kind of kept changing things in the code and seeing how that worked, and somehow that led me to being a developer now. I don't know how, but it did.
I think that's the most fascinating thing of, starting out as somebody who barely knows anything about programming, and, you've done stuff with, map editors and stuff in the past, which can lead to some very exciting things. I mean, like those, that's basically how Dota started, right? Defense of the Ancients was like, it was a Warcraft 3 mod that is now effectively a game in its own right. So a similar kind of story in a way. But it's really cool that you can start off just kind of vaguely poking around and looking up tutorials, and then cut to 10 years later and you're walking through the offices of Mojang in Stockholm. That's incredible.
I mean, it was a long journey still. Like I made one mod which we'll probably mention is the Aether, and then I made another mod called Orbis later, but I only did like 2 major projects, and I never really like did a lot of small tiny things. I really tried to do like the biggest thing possible, and then did it for like 5 years at a time, like big chunks of time, and just learnt skills as I go.
What inspired you to create the Aether mod, which is a question that came in from Electrix99 in our community?
It's kind of a few different things. So the first mod I ever made was a mod called Minecraft Advanced, which just added random things that I thought were cool, like as a kid. I added obsidian tools, added dragon tools. I added like random things in the nether, like hellhounds and dragons and all these things. And I learned a lot of this actually by just talking in an IRC community called Risicraft. And that had a bunch of really talented, really smart people who were actually, I don't know why, but they were surprisingly welcoming and accepting of, like, if I had a question about this part of the code, they would try to, help me out. And there came a point where there was a few different people that I was talking to that were, giving me advice, and we were just doing random things together. And there's a lot of names, but I'll try and randomly say some. There was like 303. I believe Risagami was involved for a little bit. Kodaiki, and many others that I can't remember at this very moment. But there was quite a few people, and we at one point were just like, we want to add a new dimension to the game. And I was looking through the minecraftforums.net, and there was a suggestion thread about adding the Aether to some degree. It wasn't exactly the same, but it had the very same visuals. It had this concept of it being a paradise, but we kind of took that idea and tried to make it a little bit more hostile. We had bosses in it. We had progression through loot. But a lot of the inspiration absolutely came from one of those suggestion threads. I wasn't super, creative and unique until probably a lot later with my modding. At first, it was definitely a lot of just looking at the community, seeing what people love, because everyone wanted a new dimension and everyone wanted Sky Islands. That was like one of the top requests on the Minecraft forums. So that's kind of what sparked me to work on the mod.
In vanilla Minecraft, there was planned to be a sky dimension that I think eventually ended up becoming the end. So it's really interesting to see how it can be taken in those two different directions. And I believe the Aether is still a project that's being worked on. It's being developed by a different group now. Were those, I presume, collaborators of yours before you got hired at Mojang? How did it feel to hand off the project to them when you were hired on?
Yeah, so it's currently being developed by Gilded Games, which is the group that we formed a while back. They're still the same people. It's not the same people as when I started the Aether like 10 years ago, because the team has just kind of swapped out and swapped in people over the years, and I've been the one constant up until that point. And yeah, it was a bit weird and a bit bittersweet actually, saying like, hey, I've got the job. Like, people were happy for me, but then they're also like, oh, we don't have a programmer now to work on it. And I'm still in contact with them all the time because they're really good friends of mine. I mean, I talked with them for many years throughout my life. They're pretty much, they're friends to me. But I still think at the same time they were very happy about it, that I was able to make a career out of what I've been doing so far. And I'm excited to see what they're doing. Like, they're still working on it and setting up a plan for how they're going to continue developing it throughout the years. And it's kind of insane that a mod started so long ago is still being worked on. I mean, it's amazing, but it's like, wow, the community is just so passionate.
And it still has a place in the community's collective memory as well. I mean, we were joking earlier about the glowstone portal thing, but it is true. It's the kind of thing that it resurfaces on the Minecraft Reddit every so often, and everyone sort of chimes in with their nostalgic memories. But I think people see that stuff being revived, and it has an enormously long shelf life if people are determined to keep developing it.
Yeah, definitely.
So how did you make that transition from making mods for Minecraft to actually working at Mojang Studios? Did you apply? Was there, were you approached by Mojang? Was there a call to arms that was sent out?
I actually just did it the pretty standard way. The way that I kind of, I had actually applied before I officially got the job, from a second application later. I applied originally for a more senior position, which was probably shooting above my experience level, but it was the only position at the time. I'm like, I'll just give it a shot anyway. But after that got rejected, understandably, I actually ended up joining another company in Australia to work in an incubation team where we basically worked on a bunch of mobile games, just like on the App Store, but we would try to come up with like new games, new ideas that could be like new avenues for that company to explore. And so that was pretty cool, and that was fun. That was a way for me to get a bit more experience in the industry outside of just, freelanced mods. But after that, after I got about a year of experience from that, I was getting very involved with the Minecraft community. I was going to a bunch of Minecraft lives. I was at the last Minecon Earth, I believe, and I was at the Nashville Minecraft Live. I've been to 2 at this point, and I was there representing as just a community member talking about modding with a few other really talented people in the modding community, like Vasky, Drolkus, many people, King Lemming. And I think from that point of just being so invested in Minecraft as a platform and as a game, I felt like I had the confidence to be able to try and apply. And I did. And it was a long process because, first of all, if you apply, you have to accept being able to move over to another country. They, at that time, don't really have, you can't remotely work in Australia at Mojang. That's not a thing. And it went through many different interviews, because there are so many members of the team, right, that, want to get involved in the interview process. And there was actually a point where I did an interview at the Minecraft Live, the last Minecraft Live that I attended, because I was already going to visit Sweden anyway to do an in-person interview. So because I was already going to Minecraft Live, I said, well, why not just do an interview there? Most of the Mojang developers are going to be there. It seems like an easy way for us to do an in-person interview without having to book a separate flight. And I think it was at that point, after I did that in-person interview, that things started to just click together. And it was kind of insane when I got the call finally, saying, yeah, you got the position. When do you want to start? I couldn't really process it for many days. I think I'm getting better at processing it now, but it's still kind of a bit mind-boggling working at Mojang.
Do a lot of your peers at Mojang have a similar story to you? Were a lot of them modders before? I don't necessarily know the sort of past credentials, as it were, of folks like Ulraf and Felix and a few of the other folks we've talked about today. Does anybody else have a really similar story to yours, or are they sort of pulled in from all over the place?
So the closest person to me in that regard of having a similar experience is Kojo. KojoMax99, I believe, on Twitter. His name's Corey, and he before has done many different mods, and one of his most popular mods is Tropicraft, and which is also another Dimension mod, funnily enough. So he had a very similar experience of most of the time he would work on mods, and then eventually he applied himself, but he had some experience in the industry beforehand, kind of similar to how I did. So I think one of the things for me, I guess, noticing a pattern is, get a small bit of experience in the industry first, and then try applying. Why not? There's no reason why you shouldn't apply. And even if you get rejected, it doesn't mean you can't apply again later after you've got more experience.
And obviously, as Tropicraft goes, that's still running as well and has regular charity events through Love Tropics. And I'm pretty sure you're still involved with a few of those as well. So it's really cool to see projects like that still take a really prominent position in the community and lead the charge on charity fundraising events and stuff. That's always super cool to see.
You've mentioned applying and getting a little bit of experience before you apply to a studio like Mojang Studios. Out of curiosity, do you think there was any, we'll say, mistakes that you made early on to give young programmers maybe a heads up on?
I don't think this ended up affecting my performance in any of the interviews, but one of the first mistakes I made was having a really unstable internet. So the first interview I had, my internet dropped out. So that definitely make sure you have a backup plan. I had to end up using data. But more broadly than that, I think for me, I'm not sure on my particular mistakes, but I would say in general, it is a very good idea to research beforehand how to take interviews. This is something that I probably should have done a little bit more of, just understanding how interviews in the software industry tend to be conducted. What are the sort of questions they're going to ask you, and what are the sort of answers that they're looking for? How do you answer it? Do you give examples? Do you give examples of particular conflicts you had in the past and how you resolve them in good ways? So just, really getting familiar with how you can approach those interviews and present your best self to them.
When it comes to actually working for Mojang, you've talked a bit on Twitter about how the process of generating and iterating on ideas works compared to developing mods, and how they're two very different processes. I think this was in response to the player criticism that modders could do similar things to stuff like the Caves and Cliffs update in a shorter amount of time, and you had a fantastic response, which honestly I have bookmarked on Twitter so that I can remember your arguments when people bring this up in discussions that I'm part of. But how does the process of developing stuff for Mojang compare to the process of developing mods? I imagine the process is a lot more collaborative. Can you speak to that a little?
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say that there are so many talented people in the modding community. What I say about, the difference between developing mods versus developing the game is not to put down modders, because, I was a modder myself. There are extremely talented people in the community. I think the thing for me that is so different about working on vanilla is the stakes. If you add something, it's going to stay there, most likely. And so because it's such a big game and it affects so many platforms and it affects so many players compared to a mod, which might only affect, I don't know, let's say 500,000 players, we have millions of players in Minecraft. And it's much bigger difference in terms of how the particular features that you implement are going to impact users in the end. And it is more collaborative. There are so many more people at Mojang that have different perspectives. And more than the people at Mojang, I would say the stakeholders of Minecraft is the community. And just look at the community and how many different opinions they have. I'm sure you have very different opinions on how a particular feature should be implemented versus some other random user. And we need to keep all of those perspectives in mind and try to find a middle ground that works for everyone, while also thinking about our own creative vision at the same time. So a lot of the times we fail the first time, and we keep failing until we find that last iteration that's like, okay, this really seems to be checking all the check marks, and it seems to fit all the different player archetypes we want to satisfy here. But that doesn't happen overnight. And compared to, let's say, a modder, developing all of the content that we have in Caves and Cliffs over a week, that's missing all of the different iterations we did beforehand, because we did that same, let's say, creature 10 times, not one time. And I think that's really the major difference. And it's not to say that mods don't iterate, they definitely do. But I think that there is generally much more pressure to get it right in vanilla Minecraft.
And considering, the legacy of the game has to be taken into account at that point, because a mod can just be retired, whereas, you don't retire features of the vanilla game. Historically speaking, the game is added to, and very rarely, if ever, has something been flat out removed. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's something people don't always consider, is that you are making changes or adding features which are going to be there in perpetuity forever.
Yeah, and then it's going to bite us back as well, because if it's a particular feature that has problems, we need to design around it in 10, 15 years, and that's going to be a legacy problem for the rest of the game's life.
I think it is one of the things that makes the game so special, though, is adding features and then adding more stuff to them in future. Like I rave on this show about how much I enjoy that campfires then got the functionality of affecting bees, and you can do so much with them, and then soul campfires are added, and the sort of variety that comes up over the years as stuff develops. So if you nail it, you really nail it in that sense. Let's move on to talking about your pet project, the Warden, then, because you've shared a few looks into the development process for this mob in particular, and it does seem to be a passion project for you. So I'd love to hear more about the inspiration behind the Warden and the Deep Dark, because I feel like it almost goes back to that story you were telling about building your house above a cave full of zombies and not wanting to go outside of your door for fear of what was out there. I feel like the Warden is almost playing into that a little bit. Do you want to tell us what the genesis of the Warden was?
You're absolutely spot on. And I mean, I've talked about it before that the Warden for me is inspired by the first night that you play Minecraft. But I think to be a little bit more specific, I think it's inspired by the first night of Minecraft, but trying to bring that experience back, but at a much later stage in your progression. Once you get all of the best enchantments and netherite armor and netherite weapons and all of these crazy things in the game, which, have gotten slowly and slowly more powerful over the game's development, you're kind of invincible. You're not quite invincible, but you're pretty close to it. And I'm wanting to bring back that feeling, but when you have achieved all of those things as well, almost like a constant that will, no matter what level you're at in terms of progression, this is always something that you have to fear. And I think Minecraft has always been a little bit about fear. It's almost about having this, it's like the contrast between what seems to be somewhat of a beautiful, normal world that suddenly has so many surprises in it in terms of fearful opportunities. And I love that aspect of Minecraft. As I said, it's the hook. It's the reason why I played the game. And so I wanted to experiment with how to bring that back. And the Warden was at least the answer so far. But, I did experiment with other things as well. Other different creature ideas, and I think I'm pretty happy with the Warden in the end, because it is something you can avoid, whereas I don't think it would be fair to add something which is super scary, but at all costs it will just kill you no matter what. With the Warden, at least, through its system of being blind and not having, only being able to detect things through sound and vibrations, at the very least, you can be super quiet. And then it becomes more of like a stealth mission in the Deep Dark. And that's another thing for me, is that the Deep Dark is inspired by, what if we just had an entire biome where it's a stealth mission? That was the core for me. How can we change the gameplay so much in one area versus all the other areas of the game? That's another reason why we also don't have other mobs in that biome as well. We don't have creepers, we don't have zombies, we only have wardens. That makes it very different.
I think it's an incredibly ambitious thing to do, to add so much in Caves and Cliffs that introduces new mechanics. I mean, with Copper, you've added things that age, and with the Warden and Skulk sensors, you've effectively added sound having a new importance. And I think that's one of the things that keeps Minecraft feeling like such a revolutionary game, is the fact that these sort of new physical systems can be added in to implement stuff like this, and that you're also making it part of an experience that involves a creature like the Warden. Without going too deep into the specifics, I think when players saw the Warden, a lot of them were very keen on, well, if that's a really powerful enemy, I want to defeat it in some way. And from the look at it that we got at Minecraft Live, which was, of course, a fairly early iteration of it, it seemed like it was, it picked up speed as it lumbered towards the player, but it was mostly a melee-focused enemy. And so the immediate thought as a player who has some experience with PvE is, all I need to do is place a row of blocks in front of it, or maybe pillar up a few blocks, and then shoot it with a bow until it dies. So without going into specifics, do you have a plan for that? Is player strategy taken into account when you think about how the Warden can defend itself? And to what extent does that end up getting balanced to still make it a position that players can ever win?
Yes, there is a plan. Unfortunately for everyone, the Warden, I would say, and again, I'm trying not to promise anything here, but
Sure.
I feel like the Warden has to be a little smarter than other mobs because it has so much sensory deprivation compared to, for example, a zombie. A zombie can see you and just attack. It doesn't need to hear things. It doesn't need to sense vibrations. Whereas the Warden, if all it can do is just hear you, right? It's pretty easy to just sneak and never make a noise ever. And likewise, it's pretty easy to just, build a few blocks up and create a pillar and just attack her from above. None of these things are going to work. That's all I'm going to say.
I love that, though. I really like the fact that that's the kind of thing that's being taken into account with a new feature like this, because there is certainly a culture amongst players of finding the cheese for stuff like the Wither, for example, where you can trap it in bedrock and it's relatively harmless to take down. And I like the fact that there are potentially strategies that will then emerge in the player community that counter some of the stuff the Warden can do, but it's still going to be something that we have an eye for either way. So in terms of what you've been working on for part 1 of Caves and Cliffs, because of course the Warden has been delayed until the future, how much of what we see in Caves and Cliffs part 1 have you had a hand in? How much of that was sort of, features that you worked on individually, or how much of it is done in collaboration with other developers? And is there anything in particular from that you are especially proud of?
For me, on part 1, what I worked on the most was actually some of the ore changes. First of all, kind of collaborating a little bit with Jappa about, how should we approach changing the ore textures, for example. And he kind of asked me at one point, because he thought that it was really important that one of the ores had to keep the original texture shape to some degree. And originally, he was like, oh, maybe it should be coal. And I said, no, it's got to be diamond. 100%. Diamond has to be the one that keeps the same texture shape the entire way through, because I think it's so iconic. Out of all of the ores that you could possibly find in the game, I think seeing diamond at the corner of your eye, that shape is just, to me, diamonds, always. And then, of course, on top of that, I also worked on the raw ores, which was interesting because it wasn't originally done just for the whole fortune byproduct of being able to use fortune on iron and gold, although that was kind of something that was in our heads, because I always found it strange that fortune only worked on very specific ores, and it was kind of a very techie reason as to why they didn't, because iron ore dropped, the block versus an actual item. But the real reason was because in part 1, we were going to have deepslate blobs around diamond level. And if players had to keep picking up, iron and gold blocks that were both deepslate and stone, I think for an entire update that you have to play that until part 2, that would get really annoying very quickly. So I thought it was really important for inventory management that players could actually mine it without having to have 2 separate slots for each types of iron and each types of gold.
It's honestly been fantastic being able to combine the raw ore items into blocks, because that's effectively like taking a compressed 9x9 block of iron ore blocks home. And so you actually come away from those caving trips with so many more resources than you used to, and not just because of fortune, but because you can carry more of it with you the rest of the time. I know some people who are definitely collecting all of the deep slate ores with Silk Touch still, because they're so interested in, the ones that they can get now and can't get later. But it's really cool to see all of the ores working consistently with Fortune versus Silk Touch. I think that's going to be really useful for new players as well, because you only have to describe ores one way instead of, oh, by the way, there are these 2 exceptions, which are iron and gold, right? I think it makes a lot of sense that everything behaves more or less the same way, and when you describe Fortune, you don't have to, give 2 asterisks that it doesn't work on iron and gold.
I was quite proud of the ore changes in the end. But another second proud moment, I guess, was deepslate. That was another thing that I worked on. And I think for me, it's just because it's such a lovely set of blocks. Like, it wasn't hard to work on in terms of the tech. I mean, Jasper did all the work. He was the real winner here in terms of the final result. But deepslate is lovely. I absolutely love everything about that block set.
I guess it was originally conceived as the environment that you'd find the Warden in, right? Like, looking at the sort of early mock-up that we saw at Minecraft Live, the block in the wall wasn't any kind of stone we had seen before, and the name at first kind of suggests the deep dark in the deep connection that it has, although it was called Grimstone originally. And I feel like a few people, I've noticed you responding to a couple of folks on Twitter who still seem to be holding on to that name a little too tightly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always interesting with name changes. I think that was the first time that we made a name change that was like truly controversial. Everyone really liked Grimstone. I like Grimstone as well, but I think the principle behind why we changed the name was a very strong one, because Minecraft is inherently a creative game, and maybe it's maybe it is a little too like strict of like, oh, you can't have feelings in block names. Everyone pointed to Crying Obsidian and say like, oh, well, it cries, come on. But I think it is important that, because it is a sandbox game in the end, how players use that particular block set. You don't want to necessarily put connotations of it feeling grim, like as in, an actual emotion. Whereas deepslate is a little bit more neutral. You could put that in a build, and if players know the name of it, they're not going to instantly go to grim, maybe.
So I guess we can rule out having happy little trees in Minecraft in the future too.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you've had a lot of fun working on the different things coming in caves and cliffs, or that have come out in caves and cliffs even. Out of curiosity, Maya F. wrote in and wanted to know, what is the favorite project or feature that you have worked on in developing Minecraft so far?
Oh, that's really tricky. I think I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I'm going to talk about two things. I want to highlight very quickly the Strider. The reason why I really liked working on the Strider is because originally when I came into the office to work for the first time, I saw this big board of like all of these new features that are coming to the Nether update. And I was like, what is this? There's like all of these features that I don't know about. And it was kind of crazy at the time. And we kind of went through them of like, what all these features are. And eventually we arrived at the very end of the list to like a feature called the Strider. And everyone hated it. Everyone thought it looked ugly, like in terms of the visuals. They thought it looked modded. And they just didn't think it fit Minecraft. They didn't think it would ever work. It would always look weird in the game. And I'm really happy that I took that on, because I kind of started the Strider almost like trying to prove everyone wrong that it could fit into Minecraft, and that it could actually be cute instead of just being ugly. And I think there was a moment where I was showing one of my teammates the baby Strider as it was waddling around, and it was on one of the parents' head. And that was a moment where like it just clicked for them, and they're like, okay, that's adorable. We need this in the game.
I will say that I love the Strider. The Strider is, especially in early game, my favorite way to get around the Nether and find the structures that you're looking for, the Nether fortresses and so forth. I always saddle up a Strider if I can find one now, because I've developed such a love for them that I cannot possibly bear to kill them either. Even though they drop string and they'll give you the saddle back if you kill them and that kind of thing. I'm just like, no, can't do it. I'm bringing 2 saddles because one of these Striders is just walking off into the lava with my first one.
Yeah, there's a part of me that wants to add something which allows you to get the saddle without killing them, because it's just too sad. It's way too sad. But to answer the question again more specifically, I know it's not out yet, but I got to say that the most fun I've had is probably on the Warden, because it's so challenging as a design task, working on something so different within the Minecraft environment, and even the tech challenges, because I did a lot of the tech myself with a lot of collaboration and advice from other people in the Java team. I just think it was it went through so many iterations, and one of the things that I am so excited to do is when the Warden finally comes out, show all of the old iterations that I had, because you cannot imagine how wildly different it used to be. There was a point where the Warden originally it was called a Stalker, actually. And it used to have like this like white flesh with like holes in it, and it used to be even like grimmer and gorier, and we had to tone it down because it was too much. But there's more, and I can't wait to show all of that, because it's been a journey to get to where it is now, to find that perfect balance between this is scary, but it's not going to make children never play the game ever again.
I'm really looking forward. I think I'm probably looking forward to that as much as I am the Warden, now that you've mentioned that, because it sounds like you went from Pan's Labyrinth to Studio Ghibli, and somehow found a kind of sweet spot in between. And I think for a start that goes to show, going back to the Grimstone deepslate comparison, like just how much difference the name can make, because Warden inherently implies that it is somehow guarding something, whereas Stalker obviously has other connotations that you might want to avoid in a Minecraft context anyway.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, but is still like such an evocative name in itself. And before we wrap up here, because you said the Warden has gone through so many iterations, like I assume that you've had to collaborate quite closely with the art team on the look of the Warden. So what was the process there? Because I imagine you're working on the tech side of things, but they have to come up with the visuals. How have you guided them through that process?
Yeah, actually so much, especially with the Warden. I collaborated with both Mariana, who is one of our concept artists, and Jasper, who was the lead artist for Minecraft. So Mariana in particular, we kind of just sat together and just kind of like, first of all, I established what I was trying to achieve creative vision wise. I, of course, laid out that this is meant to be scary, but also it's meant to be a little bit charming, a little bit cute, but not so much that people look at it and they just laugh. Like, that was very important to me. While it should be charming and it should be a little bit cute, I don't want people to not take it seriously. But then I also don't want it to, be too scary either. So it was a really tricky balance. But a lot of it was basically just Mariana would try a few ideas. She would show it to me and Jasper. We would give some feedback. Either I would give some direction of where we might head. Jasper might comment on, this concept is really cool, but it's really hard to put in block form. And it was just a lot of back and forth. And to Mariana's credit, what I really loved about the process working with her was that she would create like entire cards of like just 50 different designs of what the Warden could look like. And every single one of them were just brilliant. Like every one I was like, oh my God, that could be a mob in the game. And it was really hard to choose from which is the direction we want to go, because these all look actually fantastic in their own different ways.
We will get a look at the Warden at some point, I'm sure, and hopefully you'll be happy to come back onto the show and talk to us about the experience of meeting the Warden in game, because yeah, we all can't wait here, but we will have to, and it's going to be worth it. But that's pretty much all we have time for this episode of the Spawn Chunks. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such an incredible conversation, fascinating to get your take on so much of what we've talked about today. While you're still here, is there anything you'd like to plug? Your own Twitter profile, any side projects or shout-outs for teammates or friends, whatever you feel like plugging?
Yeah, sure. You can find me at Kingbdogz on Twitter. And in terms of shout-outs, I just want to shout out my team, everyone at Mojang, everyone in the gameplay team, Agnes, Corey, Henrik, Nia, all of them have been absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to release part 2 eventually. It's going to be an absolute blast.
Well, thank you so much once again. You can find links to all of the stuff we talked about today, including Kingbdogz's Twitter profile and a few of the other folks that we have mentioned today, in our show notes, which are at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, please consider putting some value back in by supporting us through patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Joining our community there gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat, and it gets us closer to our next goal of a monthly Minecraft audio hangout where every month we'd sit down with our patrons and just open up a chat about what we've been doing in Minecraft that month. We're currently at 256 patrons, which is up from last week. We had 255, so one more has joined the fold. Special thanks to our content engineers, General Patton 82, Hunter 555, Jumbo Sale, and Yitz for their support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spun Chunks on Twitter and Instagram. A personal recommendation, however, is the best way to share the podcast. Just poke a friend in the arm from a safe distance and tell them about The Spun Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. Those places include iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. You can email the show at spunchunkmail@gmail.com. And again, a big thank you to everyone that wrote in for questions with Brandon today. Really good questions. It was hard to pick the ones that made the show. The RSS feed is linked on the spunchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the Render Distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixel Riffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/pixelriffs, where I attempt to make sense of this crazy and wonderful game in 2 series, Empire's SMP and the Hardcore Survival Guide. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I am mostly mining copper and chopping trees, and I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which just relaunched for Season 8. You can find us through a quick search on YouTube. Aside from that, I'm at Pixel Riffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything I'm doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio, is at joelduggan.com. You can listen to my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment at thecitadelcafe.com. We talked about Sweet Tooth on Netflix and Superman and Lois this week with Alistair. You can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media, and of course, Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I am building a medieval town on the Citadel Minecraft server.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite. Hail to the king.